Welcome to Politics Chat, in which I try to answer your questions about modern politics. Let me start in today, get right into it today, and start in a place that you did not expect me or ask me to start, but I think it's really important. And that's that this is February 3rd. And February 3rd is the day that Homeland Secretary um, Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, planned to end the TPS status, the temporary protected status for Haiti. And I want to talk you through a little bit about what happened because it matters for many reasons, but it's got a really interesting larger picture behind it. And that's that what happened to create the idea of a temporary protected status is in 1990, Congress got together and looked at the fact that presidents were designating some countries a need for a protected status and others, arguing about. And Congress got together and decided to create a system for the US government to decide whether or not a country needed special protective status for its people after a political disaster and a natural disaster, after there was some reason that people from that country needed to be able to come to the US temporarily. These are not necessarily people who wanted to emigrate, but they needed to because of war, because of a hurricane, or there was some reason that they needed to be able to get out of their country and have a place to live and work. And that temporary protected status, TPS, is supposed to be outside the realm of politics. So there's a very clear set of rules and regulations that a country has to go through in order to get TPS. And then that TPS is automatically renewed. There's work to be done, but it's expected to be renewed until whatever the crisis is in that country is resolved. So often TPS goes on for a long time. Sometimes it doesn't have to, but there is a system in place. And it's supposed to be overseen in a nonpartisan way by people like the Department of Homeland Security. So that goes in place in 1990. And the Haitians who began to come to this country, about 353,000 of them, this isn't a drop in the bucket, began to come after a terrible hurricane hit Haiti in 2010. You may remember that. And on the heels of that, there has been the violence in Haiti is horrific, and there's been real political violence. And Haiti has basically not been pulled off the TPS status since then, simply because for all those 353,000 people who came to the US, it's not quite that many, but it's just under that. Those people who came to the US, there's nothing to go home to. Their lives are in danger. The medical care is no good, and so on. So Kristi Noem, since she became Secretary of Homeland Security, has canceled the TPS status for every country that's been brought in front of her. There have been 12 of them. And they tend to be countries that are war torn for some reason, or countries that the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, has described as blank hole countries, right? He's talked about how he doesn't want people from them. We want to get rid of all of them, and so on. He's said of the Haitians, for example, the ones in Springfield, Ohio, that they were eating pets and things like that, which is completely false. But what's interesting about this is that in a decision issued on the 2nd, yesterday, a federal judge looked at what Noem had done and said something really interesting. And the decision, by the way, is about 84 pages. It is available online if you're interested in it. As usual with a legal decision, read the beginning and the end primarily, although there was a lot in the middle of this one. But you may not care about what are the relevant laws that she is citing for why she can do things. But if you're interested, it's there, and it's not a bad thing to take a look at. What's interesting about it is she says right out that there are rules and there are regulations and there are laws that the US Congress has put into place to make this orderly. It's not something that you do by your gut. You check a bunch of boxes and that's how it's done. And that Kristi Noem has come in and changed all of that, ignored it all, ignored the law, ignored the procedures based on her ideology. And that ideology, she doesn't spell it out in the decision. The judge doesn't spell it out in the decision, although she explains the evidence that she has for that. I will spell it out. It's white nationalism. They don't want, and she's very clear. She put this. Noem is very clear. She put this in a social media post. We don't want any of these people. And what's interesting about that moment to me is that, first of all, the judge said she's going to put a hold on that Noem did not follow the law. She did not follow the required procedures. She is just doing this because of her ideology and Donald Trump's ideology. And they have defined these people from Haiti as criminals and grifters, and I don't have all the adjectives, but the judge actually says, this just doesn't comport with reality. In reality, TPS holders are in the workforce at extraordinarily high rates. I think it's 94.6%. They have lower crime rates than native-born Americans. They contribute, I think it's $1.3 billion in taxes every year, and that's just the TPS holders from Haiti. And those same TPS holders from Haiti contribute about $3.4 billion to the U.S. economy. They've been here, many of them, for more than 15 years, and they're embedded in their societies. It's kind of weird, not kind of, it is weird to look at this and not take into account any of the reality and simply say, we don't want Black people. And she calls that out, the judge. And as I say, she put a stay on Noem's order that these people, as of today, were supposed to become illegal immigrants. They're legal under TPS, but you take away TPS, and they would have become illegal, which would have created 353,000 individuals. And you've seen a lot, I suspect, about the fears of ethnic cleansing. This is something very clearly that ICE and Border Patrol intended to go in and really just attack these people. That currently is not going to happen. It's been put on hold because, again, these people are all here legally under the designation of temporary protected status. But it was a really interesting moment because, to me, it's the moment where reality, the fact that these immigrants are in professions that are terribly short of workers, and also and they are great contributors to society. They've been here a long time, versus an ideology that says they can never be welcome in the United States. And that's actually something I wrote about a couple of nights ago, because that idea that America is going to have a caste system where only some people have rights and privileges, and everybody else is welcome to come here and work in a subordinate status, or maybe not welcome to come and work, but it's going to be in a subordinate status, and they can never become Americans. And that's incredibly contrary to what America has always stood for, the idea that immigrants can come here and they can work hard and they can work their way up and they can become Americans. They can become citizens that have the same vote that, somebody like me has. My family's been here forever. That idea that that's what America means is kind of coming together around this issue and this legal decision. So immediately after Ray's advanced this decision and said, no, you're not going to turn 353,000 people into illegal immigrants. We're going to let this play through the courts, and we're going to have an orderly system here. Stephen Miller, who is the deputy White House chief of staff and the one who's really pushing this white nationalism, along with Kristi Noem and along with Kristi Noem's advisor, Corey Lewandowski, came out and said, well, this is an unelected judge. This is, they're destroying our Constitution. That the only thing that mattered here was that the people elected Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is allowed to do anything he wants because he got elected by the people. That too is really interesting because, in fact, what is happening is, as the government made a decision, plaintiffs, there are 5 Haitian immigrants who have TPS status, challenged that decision, and it went into the courts, which is how our system works. And the government will appeal this decision by this federal Judge Reyes, and it will continue on up the court cases as long as anybody wants to pursue it. And my guess is they'll pursue it all the way to the Supreme Court. But it was an interesting moment because, of course, who's unelected here and who is not participating in the system as it was designed? Stephen Miller. So the idea that he would come out and basically say, we, again, unelected, we get to do whatever we want because Donald Trump won an election, is essentially a dictatorship. That's not how our system works. And I promise you, he wouldn't be sitting there and letting someone like Joe Biden do whatever he wanted, right? Then all of a sudden, everything would have gotten tied up in the courts and so on. That's the way the system works. So it was this interesting moment where you're really seeing crystallize a fight over what it means to be an American. Are we, in fact, a white nationalist country in which people of color are welcome to be servants or serfs or whatever? And by the way, that includes, that's going to include not just people who are ethnically or racially defined, but politically defined as well. That's already underway. Or are we a society where everyone is created equal? And so long as you play by the rules, as these Haitians have done, you're welcome to come in, work hard, and live here legally, whether or not you're going to become a citizen down the road or not. And it just was a really interesting moment. And you're seeing a lot of stories about this as in, phew, we're not going to have this ethnic cleansing we were afraid of. But I actually think there's a lot more to it. Because what you are also seeing in Stephen Miller's insistence that he can do whatever he wants is something you're also seeing from President Donald Trump. And that's that it is very clear that the American people are united in hating what ICE is doing. And by the way, I said this before, we tend to use ICE as an umbrella for all of the federal agents that are working sort of as Trump's goon squad, because as I've said to you a million times, most of the law enforcement officers in the federal government or the military in the federal government have their own histories, their own traditions, and it's very, very, and their own laws that constrain them. So it's very hard for Trump to commandeer them. But Homeland Security is not that way. Homeland Security is a very new department. It's organized after 9/11, and it does not have that tradition. And there's a lot in it. Where a lot of little organizations in it, bigger ones and littler ones, who do have law enforcement officers. And those are the people he's turning out. Somebody noticed the other day, I think there was an ATF officer, and someone said, what is ATF doing here? And the answer is those are people who can be deployed by the federal government. So they're sort of his private little squad. Do you remember in his first term, there was that incredibly dramatic film of law enforcement officers on the Lincoln Memorial without their big insignia on or anything? That was people from different branches of the federal government, and that's why they didn't have their badges and stuff on. So people hate that. I mean, we hate that ICE is throwing tear gas at children, is breaking windows. ICE is not that big. And again, I'm using ICE and Border Patrol. I've talked to you about the difference between those two before. They're trying to create terror in society and trying to convince us that they are far more powerful than they are. ICE has about 20,000 people right now in ICE, although morale is very low and a lot of people are quitting. So I don't know what those numbers look like now. They're trying desperately to hire more people. It's not going terribly well. And they're running into real opposition among people that tend to be sort of the backbone of the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party. So you're seeing a lot of elderly people, you're seeing a lot of white suburban people. And by the way, the idea that the suburbs are white, that's very yesterday. The suburbs are predominantly people of color. But you're seeing this real pushback on what the federal government is doing. And that is showing up in the polls. Trump's polls are historically low, and they're not getting better every time he arrests a 5-year-old or a 2-year-old. Or, one of the things that we have not seen yet, and is very much on my mind, is these concentration camps. And what we know is bad. So what we don't know is going to be horrific. It just is. And this literally keeps me up at night. We are learning more about them. There was a court decision, I think it was yesterday, that said that the detention facilities cannot prevent Congress people from making unscheduled visits because that's part of their oversight duties. We will learn more as this goes forward. But the more we learn, the less likely it is that someone's going to say, oh, never mind, I think Trump's a great guy. So if you have that picture back there, first of all, the idea that we've got a struggle between what it means to be an American, and Americans certainly seem to be backing the idea of, hey, we're all in this together, and we don't like Stephen Miller running the world. Then what's next? And this is something that a lot of you asked about. Trump is increasingly talking about taking over the federal elections, taking over elections. Now, let's just start with the fact that's unconstitutional. But as we know, that doesn't necessarily mean a lot in the Trump administration. There are a lot of people expressing concern over certain laws that Trump is interested in. And yeah, we can talk about those laws. But I think we saw in Georgia earlier, at the beginning of the week, must have been last week, what he's talking about. He has been working since before the 2020 election. Just a reminder that he has been arguing all along. He even took it back to the campaign of 2016, whenever anybody else looked like they were doing well in the going for the nomination in 2016, he would say it was rigged. Right? That's been his MO all along. He was just going to claim that whatever happened, it was rigged. He's been sowing that since, as I say, 2016, but really it took off in 2019 and 2020 when he himself was trying to rig the election against Biden. That's what he got impeached for. And certainly after the 2020 election, when he lost by more than 7 million votes. He lost by 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. This was not a squeaker of an election. And remember, in 2016, he actually lost the popular vote. He definitely lost the popular vote in 2020 as well. He's sowing this idea that our elections cannot be trusted. And he's doing that, as he did last week, by seizing the ballots from a warehouse in Georgia. Now, somebody asked me about why those ballots still existed. Normally, they're only kept 2 years. There was a court order that those would be kept. That's why they were still in existence. Now, he's broken the raid on that warehouse has broken the chain of custody. So those ballots, they're no good anymore. And you can't introduce new people. And those are no longer what he's saying. We're going to see all kinds of irregularities. Sure, you and I could sit and write those irregularities now because we can't trust any evidence any longer. Makes me crazy that they did that. But you're seeing him now. I would lay money he's going to try and argue that there was some kind of corruption in 2020. Now, of course, it's too late to redo 2020, but it's not too late to convince his voters that if anybody but the Republicans win in 2026, that there's been cheating going on. And having Tulsi Gabbard there was really interesting for a number of reasons. If you remember, I've talked to you about this before. The Supreme Court gave Trump a lot of leeway in national security issues. And so, basically they said, yeah, he basically is, supposed to do what we tell him to, but you don't want to interfere with him over national security issues. So if you look, he's defining everything as a national security issue, like the tariffs, national security, the going after the leader of Venezuela, national security. So now it certainly appears as if he is going to try and argue that he needs to take over elections for national security reasons. But he's not talking about a federal law that would have to be bipartisan. And there are many ways that we could write laws that would change things for everybody. He's specifically saying he wants to go after 15 or 20 places. Well, those are places that he loses elections at, like Fulton County, Georgia, because Fulton County, Georgia tends to vote Democratic. And if you got rid of Fulton County, Georgia, or got rid of the vote there, Georgia would become a reliably red state, which it is not right now. It is a purple state. Similarly, Pennsylvania, Michigan, you could do that in a lot of places. And I will add Minnesota. He insists that he keeps winning Minnesota. He has not won Minnesota in the last 3 cycles. He lost it each time there. So I think what you are seeing is a recognition that he cannot win in 2026. The Republicans cannot win in 2026 unless they cheat. Why does he care so much about 2026? He's 455 years old. He's one Big Mac away from being able to spend the rest of eternity golfing. Why does he care about 2026? And the answer to that seems to me glaring. You can disagree because I am not in Trump's head. Maybe he just hates to lose. We know that he hates to lose. This administration has been the most corrupt administration in American history by a long shot. And there is every expectation that if the Democrats take the House of Representatives in 2026, they will begin investigations. Now, they may not be able to impeach Trump because you need a majority vote in the House to impeach, but then you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate to convict. They may not get that, but what they will be able to do is really turn up the investigations. And those investigations are going to turn up corruption. Things like, I don't know if you saw this because it was over the weekend, but the Wall Street Journal had a blockbuster story of the fact that somebody representing the United Arab Emirates, who is the brother to the guy who's the president of the UAE, United Arab Emirates UAE stands for United Arab Emirates. It's a tiny, very oil-rich country. He basically went almost halvesies into the Trump family's cryptocurrency business that they started right before Trump took office the second time, World Liberty Financial. And by putting up half the money up front, that immediately put more than $180 million into the Trump family's pockets and about $31 million into Steve Witkoff's pockets. Steve Witkoff had been named the Middle Eastern envoy by Trump. I mean, come on, like that's not how much of a sleuth do you need to be to see that that was a problem, especially when months later Trump gave the UAE access to very sophisticated American chips that the Biden administration said, no, you can't have those. That's going to be proprietary information for the Americans because we're afraid you're going to share with China. And they've got it all now. About 500,000 chips a year are going to the UAE in this deal. So he's worried about not just impeachment, but also investigations and what those could turn up. So he's also worried. I'm seeing what else I can tie together here. He's also, of course, I'm not sure I can tie this directly. He's also very worried about what's in the Epstein files. Now, remember that what we have seen in the Epstein files now is about half of them, a little less than half of them. And it's what is in there already is horrific. Horrific. But you know what I'm not seeing a lot of in there? And mind you, I am not reading them. There's several million of them, and I figure other people are combing through them and finding stuff. So far, there hasn't been a lot that surprises me. I am really, really interested in the financing. Where's the money moving in that? It's obviously a multi-billion-dollar scheme. We know that from work that Ron Wyden of Washington has done. Oregon. Sorry about that, guys. Has done, but it's just not in those files. It's coming out, which I think is really interesting. I have guesses about why that is. But again, the more that we learn about those files and about the interconnection of what certainly seems to be a very elite group of powerful people around the world, but especially in the United States, who are pulling the strings, the more the American people are going to get more and more upset about that. So that is also out there. And you asked me, speaking of this, why are the Clintons testifying, or why did they not want to testify? And this actually, I think, is quite interesting. Bill Clinton has made it clear that he wants everything that's in those files to come out. I don't know what's in there. Hillary Clinton is almost certainly not in them. I've never heard a hint that she is. The fact that they want her to testify pretty clearly suggests that what the Republicans are trying to do is what they always try and do for investigations. They try to get sound bites to put on right-wing media. Why else would you have Clinton? They'll probably ask her about Benghazi or something that they feel that they can make something out of in a soundbite. But by testifying, Bill Clinton anyway, and maybe Hillary Clinton as well, set the precedent that if they can testify, former president, right? Former Secretary of State. Why can't Trump? Why can't Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, who is also in the Epstein files pretty thoroughly, not at least with one visit after Epstein was first convicted of sexual assault. So there is that, and there is also the fact that once they have done that, unless there's something hugely blockbuster, which I'd be shocked by at this point, they're no longer going to be the center of attention. Like it's over. And the attention will turn back to those people that are not testifying. And I will say the other thing to look for in those Epstein files is it's interesting how much is coming out about the man who used to be Prince. Oh, which one is he? I'm sorry, I'm really bad at the royals. I don't remember which one he is. Maybe somebody could put it in there. You know who I mean, right? The guy below Prince Charles, who was married to Fergie. Anyway, he's not Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. I think they're trying to throw him to the wolves. That is, if people are paying attention to Prince Andrew, they're not going to be paying attention to the people in the United States, because it's just interesting to me how much there is on him when, in fact, people like Elon Musk are in there a lot. And that's only so far what we have seen. There's so much still that we have not seen. And if this is what they thought it was okay for us to see, I do want to see it. They need to come out. But that stuff's got to be awful. And whether it's awful because of, I think we know it's going to have horrible stuff in it, personal horrible stuff. But I think there's also a lot of financial stuff there. And at the end of the day, this was about power and this is about money. So he's worried about that coming out as well. So I think what we're going to see from now on going forward is this dead run on his part to stay in office forever. At the same time, you're seeing people like Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance and perhaps Kristi Noem trying to create a system that will stay in place even if Trump is no longer in office, so that the system will continue to go forward. And that's why you're pouring so much money into ICE and trying to create detention camps and all that, is to make sure that it doesn't matter who the president is, because the system, which is a fascist system, will stay in place regardless of who that is. Now, you asked a lot of questions about the Democrats, and I'm at the end here. And somebody just asked, I might be coming down to something. I don't think so. I'm actually, where I am was not equipped for this cold snap, and it's just so freaking cold. There's a window next to me, and there's a breeze blowing through it. You've asked about the Democrats and the Democratic leaders. And let me tell you a couple of things there. First of all, it's important to remember that those of you who are listening to me are so much more engaged in politics than most Americans. Here's a statistic I learned just this weekend. Do you know how long most Americans spend paying attention to politics? It's 4 minutes a week. 4 minutes a week. So there's a piece today out in Strength in Numbers by J. Elliott Morris, who's very, very good at statistics and at understanding what numbers look like for a society. Most Americans are paying attention to their daily lives. They care about the price of food. They care about not having their kids' schools interrupted by ICE. Very little else breaks through. So when you're really angry at the Democrats for sort of taking too mild a stance, I get it. And I've been really hammering on the idea that you can both be in favor of democracy and be in favor of cheaper chicken. But they are reacting to the fact that the vast majority of Americans are not engaged in politics. So you look at somebody like Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries, both Democrats of New York. They're really trying to keep a coalition together where the base of the weight of the coalition, not the base, but the weight of the coalition just doesn't care about the fact that that ICE is destroying the Fourth Amendment by saying it doesn't need judicial warrants. Which is crazy illegal. I bet, most of you could go to many of your neighbors and they would be like, what's the Fourth Amendment again? So there are many different roles that one plays in politics. And one of them is creating coalitions. Some of them is getting votes. and Schumer's been pretty good about getting votes. Some of it is whipping people up to embrace ideologies, and AOC is phenomenal at that. Bernie Sanders is good at that too. Bernie Sanders does not have the skill set to get things through Congress. He's really never, I think, sponsored a winning bill. But his role is more to get out there and get people involved in the issues. So people are asking, should they go after the Democrats? I look at it a little bit differently in this moment. The Democrats are a minority party. They're doing the best they can. They're throwing sand in the gears, and they're managing to break off funding for DHS out of these appropriations bills is huge. Because the trick is, again, all these people saying, you wanted to shut it all down because we had to do this. Most Americans, if you shut down the government, are going to recognize their missing paychecks, the fact they can't go to, the DMV or whatever is shut down, national parks. They are not going to get the larger question here. So by funding everything but DHS, the Democrats got everything else to continue to move, and they're going to be able to fight over DHS. And that's an issue in part because DHS is actually funded through September 30th, 2029. So if you'd shut down the government, everything but ICE would have stopped. So that was actually a really important thing. And the Democrats really are doing that. What I would say in this moment is people spend a ton of time looking at Democrats and Republicans, and yet there are more people registered as independents than are registered as either Republicans or Democrats. And in this moment, what I see coalescing is it's actually quite old, but for this moment, a new approach to politics that is sort of post-partisan. That is, if you can get beyond Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, are the Clintons and the Bushes, whatever defined us for those 40 years, what you can see is the emergence of new coalitions to really go into the 21st century, beginning with things like getting rid of the power of money in politics, getting rid of Citizens United. Huge bipartisan agreement on that. And that's one of the things that there's also huge numbers of bipartisan agreement on ICE, on reproductive health care, on common sense gun safety legislation, on higher taxes for the wealthy. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that there's more than 70% approval on that. At this point, I sort of feel like people need to grab those issues and say, I don't care if you're an independent, a Republican, or a Democrat. We want to protect the environment. We want to address climate change. And my guess is that move will pick up the D for Democrat. I think the Republican Party has jumped off a cliff with MAGA. I don't think you're going to recover that in a hurry. But rather than thinking we got to get rid of Schumer and Jeffries, which is, it just doesn't seem to me to be a very good use of your time. I think you want to get rid of the people who are imitating Nazis and pressure everybody else from every walk of political life to put in place those things that you care about. And, everything's going to be up in the air in a few months anyway. I will say personally, everybody talks about giving AOC a leadership position. I personally am dead set against that because I think she's absolutely brilliant. And I shouldn't say I've never seen, very few people can articulate a position as powerfully as she can, as quickly as she can. And you don't want her hiding in the back room, reading big position books and wheeling and dealing. Give that to someone like Schumer or Jeffries. Get her out in front of the cameras and that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of different ways that people participate. So that's where I stand on that. Your mileage may vary. I'm just observing here what seems like it'll move stuff forward. So a couple more things here. I think I covered everything you had on here. What does that mean for how you move forward? We are at this moment where the radical right, and I think I called them fascists a while back, and I think we're absolutely there. I think some of them are fascist, and embrace Nazism, which is a form of fascism. We're at this moment where all of us, if you believe in democracy, need to stand against that. And that's what I think you see happening. This attempt on the part of the administration to distract everybody by arresting Don Lemon and the other Black journalist, Georgia Holt, I think, and the other activists who were with them in the church, I think was really an attempt to try to break a coalition that was standing against the administration by putting race center space again instead of authoritarianism. This is the moment to stand up and say, we don't want ICE. We don't want, we want the Constitution. We want the laws. We don't want Trump stealing the election, and continue to pressure your local officials, state officials, especially state officials for voting rights, and national officials on that front. But I'm also going to throw in here yet again, being visible on this stuff matters. So the Visibility Brigade, the people who are out on the overpasses, are having a big thing. I think it's this weekend to call attention to ICE and the dangers of ICE detention. There are all sorts of organizations you can get involved in to create teams to talk to people about issues. I'm a big fan of Red, Wine, and Blue, creating your squads so that you know where to protest, you know what to do. But there's also, see if I get the usual ones I talk about, the card campaign that I tend to advertise, Liberal Rocks. There's the American Promise that is trying to get a constitutional amendment pretty successfully to get rid of Citizens United. There's all kinds of ways to be visible in public. And you look at how important those marches have been in the bitter cold across the country. And, I get frustrated when people say, oh, it doesn't matter if you show up to a march. It does, because it, first of all, shows solidarity with people around you so that other people who maybe aren't that happy with where things are know they're not alone. But also because it demonstrates to the people in power that their policies are not popular, so they start to make mistakes, which you've seen in the Trump administration over the last week after the shooting of Alex Preddy. They've had a number of missteps, and there's a lot of pressure within them. They're starting to turn on each other, which again, keep that pressure on there. But here's my piece of it. When people who want to get elected to government look at people in the streets and look at the letters that you're writing and listen to the phone calls and letters to the editor and just the people at the school board meetings and people in town meetings, and when they look at those things and they want to get elected to office, what that says to them is, if I want people's votes, I have to behave in this way, not in that way. And one of the things that the radical right always did so effectively was they flooded the phone lines. Rush Limbaugh would get out there and he would tell the ditto heads to do something, and they would all go do it. And this is the terrain on which we are fighting. And making sure that your voice is heard and your voice is counted is crucial. So one of the other things that I would urge you to do is get involved in organizations to protect the vote and to make sure people are registered to vote. That's going to be hugely important, and we need to do that now, not in October. And always check your registration to make sure you're registered. Make sure you speak up. That's incredibly important. And yes, giving to causes is important for sure. But just, what we are trying to do to reclaim American democracy is to bring those people who spend 4 minutes a week thinking about politics into our meetings, into our protests. They don't have to run for office, although a number of people have begun to run for office. That's a great thing to do if you're so inclined. But we need to get them off the sidelines and make them understand how important this moment is for preserving American democracy. And that's talking to people at the dump. That's inviting people over to a watch party for Red, Wine, and Blue. That's, reading something shorter than I write, but, sharing memes, making sure that people know what's really happening, which of course dictates that you make sure that you're not sharing AI slop that isn't real. But that's going to be really important going forward, because as we're seeing from the Trump administration, they're putting a ton of fake images out, really, again, illegal stuff, but who's going to stop them? This is, as I say, what Trump is so afraid of is if you start to get oversight of this administration, there's a lot of people who have a lot of stuff to worry about. So on that note, it's worth watching. It's worth watching where we are right now. But if you're really feeling uneasy, first of all, the momentum is at this point in favor of those people protecting democracy. But it's worth kind of watching the Trump administration, and rather than sort of saying, oh my God, what's he doing next? Thinking, why is he doing that? Like, what is the mechanism here that would make them do X? Why are they doing that? And so, for example, Kristi Noem's been all over the news saying, oh, we're going to make people wear body cameras. Well, I don't know, they've already been ordered to do that. But that's her trying to say to Congress, please, 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 please don't cut off our funding. We'll go ahead and we'll meet you halfway if you just promise you'll give us more money. And again, so you speak up to your Congress critter and you say, don't fund ICE until you clean it up, or maybe get rid of it altogether. You can pick wherever you are on that, but watching and trying to think of what the game is behind it, and I don't mean game as in this is fun, but these people are, aside from perhaps Trump, who is very knee-jerk, they are trying to create a world in which they can do whatever they want and the rest of us be damned. And they're going to do anything they can to make that happen. So rather than sort of reacting and letting them call the shots, it's time for us to decide what we want and to recognize what they are doing as an attempt of a losing organization to cement power. And they might still do it. This is real. There's real issues here. But if we hold together, the momentum is on our side. And in order to keep it there, the more we can stay engaged right up through this election, the better off we're going to be. Thank you for being here. If you'd like to tune in live, I record these chats on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Maine time on both my YouTube channel and my Facebook page. If you want to hear more from me, I write Letters from an American every night. It's available on Substack and on Facebook, and the audio version of the nightly letter is available the following day wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, on Saturday mornings, I talk with Dr. Joanne Freeman, the historian of the early republic, professor, and dear friend, about history and politics. We call our talks What the Heck Just Happened, and you can find them on YouTube. Politics Chat is produced by Lauren Westfall, music by Andrea Von Kampen.